kind of percentage of land is actually going to be suitable for agriculture and farming. Okay? So during the Archaic era, this is a time of prosperity. So we're talking about, kind of the economy's on the rise, people are kind of acquiring more stuff. With this, the population is going up, right? This is going to provoke a kind of like land and resource crisis. Soon, in these city-states, in these polis, there's not going to be enough land to take care of everyone, right? So this is going to be one half of the story of Greek colonization, right? Running out of resources, polis will send out a portion of their population to found a new polis somewhere else. This new polis will be politically independent, right? So it'll be a city-state itself, right? But they're supposed to kind of maintain, shall we say, a special relationship with their mother polis, right? The polis that sent out the colony, the metropolis, which is where metropolis comes from, right? The mother city. So sending out colonies, right? Because again, Greece is not, Greece is very mountainous, right? Means sending out colonies widely across the Mediterranean region and then even up around the Black Sea, right? So new Greek polis in the Archaic period are going to be found not just in Greece proper, but again, modern Egypt, right? Spain, France, Italy, Corsica and Sardinia, right? Up all around Asia Minor, islands all around the Black Sea, right? All of these, there will be Greek polis. When we talk about ancient Greece as a culture, as a concept in this class, we're not simply talking about Greece proper, but again, we're talking about this wider Greek world, right? That, many of the important events, important people, developments in ancient Greece, right, are happening kind of all throughout here, right? So again, this is a direct result of colonization. Is there a question?
So it looks like they have like a little bit of land here and there. It's like if you were to combine it, it's not that big.
If you're counting geographical space, I guess, but
yeah.
Oftentimes also, even if you look at a map that's got like the things shaded in, that is also kind of deceptive, right? Like like when I showed you the maps with like the blobs all the time. I don't know if I have one here, right? Do we have one? No, maybe not. Or something like this is kind of maybe a little deceptive, right? Because this suggests a really big area, but again, only a smaller part of this area is necessarily inhabited, or not inhabited equally, and then even sometimes you don't necessarily, if you're talking about a bigger state, right, you might not have equal control over this this part of your territory than another part of the territory. So the maps themselves, right, are deceptive in kind of suggesting both the size and the unity of some of these cultures. But you are right? Like, at least these are not large territories, but rather city-states. Okay? All right. Now again, these city-states aren't operating in a vacuum, right? That they are going to be cohabiting, sometimes, I guess, more voluntarily, sometimes more involuntarily, right? And mixing with local populations, right? So again, we talk about there being Greek colonies, but these Greek colonies are basically drawing in both the people and customs that might be there or in the nearby area when they arrive. Okay? All right. So that's part one of colonization. Part two is that the economy is going well. People are getting rich. You want to get richer, right? So in addition to sending out new colonies, right, new polis, they also start founding trade centers, right, which in Greek are called emporia. And this is where the word, like, if you've heard, like, emporium, where it comes from. So these weren't fully fledged, like, polis themselves, but more like bigger trading posts, so to speak, right? The idea was that they could act as a hub for acquiring natural resources and then shipping those back to Greece, and then as a place where they could sell Greek products, especially pottery, to the local populations. The earliest or first known of these trading posts, of these emporia, is actually off the coast of Italy. So on the island of Pithecusae, that was founded about 770 BCE, right? So again, taking advantage of its proximity to the local Italian peoples, the Italic peoples there, and the abundance of natural resources. So here again, this is kind of a close-up, right? It's going to show a range of colony and emporia scattered throughout Sicily and the bottom part of Italy. Okay? So the takeaway from this again, when we talk about ancient Greece, we're not simply talking about this territory here, we're talking about the widespread Mediterranean culture. Okay? All right. Moving on. Okay, polis, city-states, right? Not politically unified. So what kind of relationship did they have between one another during the Archaic era? Well, there was pretty, kind of regular warfare between the two, or between different city-states. So city-states would be fighting one another, right? Usually smaller scale confrontations, right? About resources or borders. So unsurprising there. But again, there was a lot of, we might say conflict. In order to try to kind of mitigate this conflict, kind of an informal diplomatic system gets put in place, right? And it starts with someone known as the Proximus, right? Which would be essentially an informal ambassador. Someone from Athens might end up living in another city-state, or have a cousin who ended up living in another city-state, or his wife's brother lives there, and you've got this kind of relationship with this person. And that you kind of task this person with trying to kind of look out for Athenian interests, right? To share news with Athens, or to kind of communicate what's going on with Athens to the other people of the city-states, right? So it very much starts off with, hey, you're from California and you're living in New York City, why don't you tell the New Yorkers about what's going on in California type stuff, right? So very, very informal. But again, a way of kind of trying to keep open dialogue between the governments of the different city-states, and again, trying to mitigate these conflicts that pop up. From this, we're going to get a more formalized system, right? Where city-states will be signing treaties with one another, right? Non-aggression pacts, and then even forming alliances, right? So agreeing that they're going to work together, despite being politically independent, to accomplish shared goals. The common English translation for these alliances that we're going to see, right, these kind of multi-state alliances, get called leagues in English. So for whatever reason, that became the preferred way of translating the Greek into English. So when we see things like Delian League, Peloponnesian League, which are going to become very prominent very soon, right? These are referring to these multi-state alliances. Okay, questions here? All right. Now, even though these city-states were politically independent, there was a sense of kind of shared cultural identity. That the Greeks saw themselves as connected and distinct from other peoples in the world. Okay? And this is something that is going to continue to be kind of nurtured and explained through what we call, or what they call, and what we call Pan-Hellenism. Okay? Now, the first thing I want to emphasize is that there is a fictional element to this, meaning, who is Greek and who is not Greek. There's no way of kind of like testing this, DNA testing or anything like that, right? It's kind of whoever people decide is Greek or not Greek. And it will be flexible and it will fluctuate over time, right? So it's kind of like whoever, the majority of the Greeks decide is kind of what the story is. And this is important because I mentioned earlier, right? That was it. So colonies, right? Is that with colonies, right? That there is kind of integration, merging with local populations, right? Who then kind of get incorporated as Greek, right? So again, a cultural designation that is going to be flexible over time. But the ancient Greeks wouldn't describe it this way. They would describe it as a hard and fast division between peoples of the world. Okay, make sense? Right. So even though they are describing it as a hard and fast division between Greeks and others, it was not. Okay, so, but this division between Greek and other, and what basically constitutes being Greek, was very, very important to Greeks during this archaic period. All right, so Panhellenism literally means all Greekism, right? So again, the Greek word for themselves, right? They didn't call themselves Greeks. That's actually what the Romans called them. They called themselves, back then and still today, Hellenes, right? Their land was Hellas. So Panhellenism, pan means kind of all, entire, Hellenism, right? All Greekism. So kind of all the Greeks or all Greekness together. And again, a way of expressing this common identity and culture in a way that separates them from other people. Okay, so the way they do this in the Archaic era, right? A big one is through setting up what are called Panhellenic sites. All or sites that are kind of the belonging, if not literal belonging, but kind of cultural belonging to all Greeks, right? These were different types of sites, right? Temples and sanctuaries, right, are the most common common forms, right, where there are special rituals, kind of being dedicated to certain gods or things like oracles that we'll talk about a little bit later, right, that were considered Panhellenic. And then through these ritual and religious practices, they would highlight unity and cooperation, right? Connected with this, probably most famous today, right, is that they would hold special athletic competitions where only Greeks were involved. And again, connected often with temples and sanctuaries, this was a way of celebrating Greek identity, right? The Panhellenic Games. The most famous of which, both in antiquity today, were the Panhellenic Games that took place at the site of Olympia, right, which was a site sacred to the goddess Hera. And again, today, the Olympics, right? Kind of linking on to that tradition. Here is the site, or some of the remains of the site at Olympia. The Temple of Hera, right? We can just see some of the columns that remain, right? Temple area, and kind of a plan of what the site itself looked like, right? Which would be temples, and then as well as an open space where the competitions could take place. Okay. All good? All right. All right. So, a very important kind of cultural / political development that also emerges in archaic Greece, tyranny. Okay, now, when you hear the word tyrant, right, today, this sounds very bad. No one wants to be a tyrant, right? Or no one should want to be a tyrant. So there's a negative sense that comes with the word.
Wouldn't it be beneficial because they can make decisions faster? I mean, if you have
Yeah, but you
multiple,
wouldn't want to be a tyrant, though. You would want to be an executive officer or a king, right? It's kind of what I mean. The word tyrant doesn't suggest anything nice, right?
Because of all the efforts for the Greeks to preserve a sort of ethnic and cultural identity, was there ever an example of them attributing Greekness to physical features like we do in modern day, or did that concept not exist back then?
So it didn't exist in the same way. So that's definitely right. So different than modern concepts of race or even kind of some elements of ethnicity today. Very different. There were some physical things that get mentioned. They tend to be of low importance. The big way it gets expressed is through differences of character, right? So kind of temperament or say emotional tendencies are a big way that some authors will express the differences between Greeks and others. Okay? All right. So again, an individual who has sole decision-making power, today that might not be a bad thing, right? But if you're calling your boss a tyrant, are you showing him respect for his, swift and nimble decision-making ability and his, ability to kind of control things? No, right? It means somehow that he is abusing his power. Okay. Now, in the ancient world, it doesn't, at least at first, have that negative connotation. And this is important, right? So a tyrant is an individual who sees his absolute power, kind of sole power, through extra-constitutional means, right? Extra-constitutional means he's not doing it the way that it should be, according to the polis, right? He's not being born of a king. That would be a constitutional way of inheriting sole power. A tyrant is someone who seizes it extra-constitutionally, right? Jeremy?
Would that be like the coup?
It could be.
Okay.
Or it just could be everyone saying, hey, Jeremy, you're now in charge of the class, right? So it doesn't even have to be a coup. It's just that there's nothing constitutional set up that Jeremy can, lead the class, but if we all agree, even if I agree, right, Jeremy would be a tyrant. Again, someone who has absolute power, but through just non-legal, non-constitutional means, right? A coup is going to be a very popular way, though, of establishing tyrants. So this is what I mean, right? There are differing views of tyrants. There are some good tyrants, some bad tyrants, right? Some popular tyrants, some unpopular tyrants during the archaic period. Now, over time, the term becomes increasingly negative, right? And the reason for this is less because of how tyrants act, although certainly that plays a part, but more because of the extra-constitutional aspect and what it means, okay? So we'll talk a little bit more about that down the road. All right, Brian.
Professor,
Yeah.
And to add to your point, is it also true when it comes to the term dictator as well?
Yeah, same thing with Rome, right? The term dictator is, in fact, a positive. I would say not even a neutral term, is a somewhat positive term at first, and we'll talk about that in a couple weeks or months. I don't know. We'll talk about that in November. We'll talk about the dictator, but a similar type of story. All right. So everyone okay with the definition of tyrant right now, right? So again, not necessarily a bad person, bad ruler, or even an unpopular ruler. But again, sole power, one person holds it, and again, extra constitutional means. Now the context here, right? Oligarchic rule. So as we mentioned, the Greek city-states are moving away from monarchy. They're moving away from kingship. That we get a group of executive officers, an advisory council of elders, right, made up of kind of the leading citizens, the nobles, the aristocrats, the wealthy. This is what we call an oligarchy, right? Rule by a few. And this is the kind of the default, most common form of government in the archaic era. So it's in this context of oligarchic rule being the norm where tyranny arises. Okay? In short, elite actions oftentimes can hurt non-aristocrats, right? It might be intentionally hurting them, or it might be unintentional. If you remember, we talked about polis having border conflicts, right? Well, the government is the one that kind of decides that the government, that they're going to go to war. But the common people, either fighting as soldiers or just farmers whose land gets messed up, are going to suffer the consequences, right? So again, people with less or no political power who are upset at the decision-making process. right? And they want a solution. They want options. They want relief. So they turn to a single individual saying, we'll support you, right? You fix things. And that's basically, in a nutshell, the origins of tyranny. All right, Juan.
Wait, so is it like how we have someone on, on the executive role, so like our president, and then you have the Congress, who would resemble like the senior advisor?
What's the difference there, though? So, like, we have a plan for succession if someone, gets hurt, or if, like, the president can't make. What's the difference between that and tyranny?
Would there be checks and balances?
No, I mean, yes, in theory there's checks and balances, but there's another, or that's connected, I guess, to the bigger thing. What's the difference?
They were elected through constitutional means.
Right, so that's constitutional in the sense that that's the way it's supposed to happen. Tyranny, extra constitutional, right? Going through unestablished channels or means. Tim.
So just establish them as constitutional, and therefore you're no longer a tyrant.
But that's okay. So the issue is that there isn't written constitutions in necessarily the same way, and so constitutional oftentimes gets described as traditional or what we've always done, and so it becomes a little bit harder to say something new is traditional. Plus, there's an added problem. Tyrant is a little close to king, and the Greeks have problems with kings. Don't necessarily have problems with tyrants, but might have problems with kings.
What's their problem with
Well, we'll talk. Because it's not Greek to have a king. I know. Like I said, it's this one starts to fall apart really quickly, but it is true. More on that later, though. Okay, so this is the context, right? People are looking for relief. They turn to someone to try to kind of fix and alleviate the situation. Okay, so who were archaic tyrants? Who were these people who seized power extra-constitutionally? Overwhelmingly, they were aristocrats themselves, right? So again, they were members of this ruling elite, or at least connected to it, who are going to kind of be given support, taking power. They tended to be individuals of distinction, people who were popular, right? So oftentimes military leaders, people who had, acted as a general in a great battle, or people who had won impressive victories in these Pan-Hellenic or Olympic Games, right? And personal magnetism and talent goes a long way as well, too. All right. Now, even though these individuals were aristocrats, right, we very much see tyranny as kind of a non-elite, right, kind of movement, right? For these aristocrats to gain power, despite my comments earlier about everyone deciding Jeremy's going to be in charge, which is technically true, but not going to be as common, right? You're going to get resistance from the aristocrats who are already holding power, right? They're not going to want to give up what they have to let one guy take over. So if you are an aspiring tyrant, you need the non-aristocratic hoplites, right? So the people who are rich enough to buy the armor to serve as soldiers in the phalanx, and even those who are too poor to do so, on your side, so that you can basically seize power, right? That you can defeat the power wielded by the aristocrats already in charge, right? So you need this popular support if you want to gain power. Another popular option is to get support from fellow tyrants. This is another trend that we'll see, right? That you can count on a fellow tyrant maybe helping you out as you struggle for power, right? The sense being is that, well, this tyrant's going to be less likely to topple me than someone else. So let's look at a hard example. So this is Kypselus, the tyrant of the city of Corinth. So in the 7th century BCE, the 600s, the city of Corinth was essentially ruled by an aristocratic clan. So kind of a large extended family known as the Bacchidae, right? The family of the Bacchids held political control in Corinth, right? So again, we're not just talking like a single individual or 3 people, kind of large extended family, but they were the ones that held all of the political cards. Now, as the story goes, we don't know if this is true or not, right? One of the Bacchidae daughters was born with some sort of physical disability. And as a result, no one else from the clan wanted to marry her, right? So she was essentially ostracized from the clan, right? And can't, kind of be part of, in the same way, this kind of big aristocratic world. So anyway, she gets married, she has a son. The son is Kypselus, and because again his mother was pushed out, his father wasn't one of these Bacchidae, right? Kypselus is also excluded from power. Briar, did you have a question or?
Yeah, does this tie in with this sort of prejudice against rulers with disabilities, like with Julius Caesar having epilepsy and keeping it a secret?
Mm-hmm. So in general, physical disabilities are viewed as, we'll say, problematic in various ways. So absolutely, right? And something, it can be viewed as a sign of weakness or inferiority of some way. So very much so. All right. So there's the context for Kypselus. Now at this time, the Corinthians themselves are very unhappy with the rule of the Bacchidae, right? Kypselus sees an opportunity, right? Supposedly he's motivated by revenge for how he and his mother have been treated. Again, we don't know. But because the people are so unhappy, they're willing to lend their support to him. He then seizes power as tyrant. And Kypselus, again, true to the definition of the word, right, proves to be a very popular ruler. And by popular, I mean, the Corinthians, especially the lower class Corinthians, are really happy with him, right? One of the big reasons why is that he enacts land redistribution, right? Which is where you take land from wealthy landowners and give it to people who have none or less land, right? So that's one of the things he does. He also focuses on investing in trade, right? Corinth is going to experience, because of this, kind of a time of prosperity and economic growth, which people are going to benefit from. Kypselus is going to pass kind of his power when he dies. His power is going to pass to his son Periander, who has a very kind of hot and cold relationship in the later Greek texts. Under Periander's rule as tyrant, Corinth becomes arguably the #1 top economic and cultural center of archaic Greece. Not #1, it's in like the top 3, right? It becomes a major cultural, economic, political powerhouse. And again, Periander is building on the work that his father did to improve the kind of lot of Corinthians everywhere. But the story goes, Periander appears to be obsessed with maintaining his power as tyrant, and very fearful that there's going to be some action against him, which is going to push him into more unseemly actions. So he starts getting kind of harsher and harsher with his policies, and things start looking darker for him. So what he does is he sends one of his kind of allies to visit another tyrant, right? Because again, tyrants are kind of helping each other out. A guy named Thrasybulus, who is the tyrant of Miletus, which is located in Asia Minor, right? Another Greek city. Again, according to the story, the kind of ally comes to Thrasybulus and asks his question, how can Periander preserve his power in Corinth? Thrasybulus doesn't say much. Instead, takes the ally through a walk, or takes the ally on a walk through his garden. And Thrasybulus, with his cane, kind of whacks off the top of every plant that has grown kind of taller than its neighbors. every flower, every crop, it's kind of grown up, an extra couple inches, he whacks it off to the top of his hand. And then he dismisses the ally. Ally's not quite sure what to make of this gardening trip, but he sails back home to Corinth and he tells Periander. Periander says, I figured it out. What Thrasybulus is telling me is that I need to kill everyone who stands out. Anyone in Corinth who kind of stands higher than the rest, right? They are going to be a threat to my power. So Periander institutes essentially a purge, killing anyone he deems a threat or anyone he deems too popular, which will result in him promptly getting deposed from the office of tyrant. And Corinth goes back to being an oligarchy. So again, tyranny, right? Beginning as this popular movement, perceived popular benefits coming from it, but at least in terms of this story, right, it becomes problematic when Periander starts behaving in kind of oppressive ways to protect his own power. Questions here?
So if he was oppressive for other reasons, he would be more acceptable?
I mean, depends what you mean by oppressive, right?
I mean, he's oppressing in order to keep the competition out.
Right.
If he's oppressing, I don't know, a minority group from other Greek city-states.
That probably would, yeah, I mean, to be honest, that probably would be less concerning. I mean, we can't say for sure, but we'll put it this way. Greeks didn't necessarily have a problem with oppression in and of itself, right? They didn't want to be oppressed. They didn't want to be the victims of it. But if it was directed towards the enemies, there was a place for this. But we'll talk more on that a little bit later. 2, okay. But anyway, all right, so there's Cypselus and Periander. All right, so this turns to our reading today. Romulus, where the main thing is that we get the story of Lydia, right? And especially its last king, Croesus. So Lydia was a large kingdom that is going to flourish for 150 years on the western part of Asia Minor. So up there, the map, Asia Minor, modern Turkey, right? You can see Lydia. So it begins as a smaller state under the Lydian kings, right? We've got Candales, someone else that we're talking about, and others, right? They're going to expand their influence over Western Asia Minor, again, often militarily, sometimes economically, so that they are ruling over a, pretty large territory, right? And again, at this time, from Candules to Croesus, Lydia is a rich, kind of powerful kingdom. One of the richest and powerful in the area, so to speak. All right, so in this primary source, first I'm going to turn it to you. I've got some stuff, but is there anything in this source, having done the reading, that you found particularly interesting or compelling or bothersome? I don't know. What stood out? Anthony.
The king's I think it was one of his guards. He was actually monitoring the wife's king getting naked. So that was something interesting.
Okay, that was something interesting. So the king has one of his guards go look at his wife while she's naked, which is kind of weird. And in fact, it's supposed to be kind of weird, right?
It kind of hilarious.
Why is it hilarious?
Well, look.
Here.
Sorry.
I didn't read this, but is that...
Okay, well, don't admit that. don't admit that to the finish. Okay, but go ahead.
But I know something about the king having a ring that makes you invisible. Is it that? The ring of Gigas or something?
So there's another Gyges,
Um,
right? And this is in Plato's Republic. And they tell stories about the Gyges who has a ring of invisibility.
so it's not that.
Not him.
Not it.
Although it might be derived with this whole idea of spying on the wife. But there's no ring of invisibility here.
No, I mean, I'm saying that because he mentioned spying on a wife.
Yeah, but the spying on the wife part, well, that might have maybe inspired Plato in some way, but there's no ring of invisibility in the story. Why is that interesting, though? I mean, this is a valid question. I mean, this is an important question that, it's an important issue that Herodotus, includes in the history here, and it tells us something important. Right.
It's interesting how as soon as the queen learns that her husband is basically flaunting her, my interpretation was he was flaunting his wife as a trophy and got off on other men admiring what he had. Not in like what we would know as cuckoldry, fetishistic
Sure.
sense, but rather he enjoyed other men pining for what he had. And as soon as the wife learned that she had been disgraced like this, she found justification to have her husband dethroned. And it sort of seemed like a sort of moralistic tale of sexual perversion, and that should, you know what I mean? Like,
Except it's less the sexual part. But yes, right? I mean, despite the fact that that's how, because of modern stuff, how we might read it, right? But definitely a form of kind of perversion, right? And so, again, who is the guard in this story? Who's the guard?
It's Gyges.
Gyges, right? So Gyges is the guard, Candales is the king. And Candales, it says, really loves his wife, thinks she's really beautiful, but again, wants to show it off. Wants to have everyone recognize just how beautiful his wife is, right? Again, kind of reading it maybe as kind of like prideful this way. And Briar, you use the perfect word, right? How does the wife feel? Because Gyges at first is like, no, I don't want to do this. She's beautiful. And the king's like, no, you can't. You really can't tell unless you go see her naked. And Gyges is like, no, but it's all good. She's really beautiful. And the king's like, no, I insist. You have to go do it. And here's the plan. So then Gyges goes and sneaks in, but the wife notices. And then Briar, so what did you say? How did the wife react, or how did she feel?
she felt dishonored.
She felt dishonored by this, right? That she was shamed by this. Okay? And so again, this is what's kind of really important, is that, for the Greek perspective, is that Candales is behaving in this shameful way, right? If it was his girlfriend, if it was his courtesan, there wouldn't have been any issue, right? So the issue was less about his partner and more that this was his wife, this was the queen. And again, he was treating her in a shameful way. And she gives a proposition to Gyges. What's the proposition she gives to Gyges?
Either you kill the king or you kill yourself, I think.
Well, or I'll have you killed.
Oh, yeah, you
right.
killed, yeah.
So either you die or you kill the king and take over, right? And so again, Gyges is like, well, easy decision for me. He kills the king and he becomes the new king. So what's the moral of the story then?
Be a moral person and not weird.
Okay, right. So again, be a moral person, right? Especially if you are
A leader.
a leader, right? The king, right? That again, this kind of, in this case, king, political leader, right, is contingent on having this kind of moral foundation. That it's because he behaves in this dishonorable or shameful way that he's going to lose his throne. And this is going to be a common story, a common trope that gets told throughout Greek history. Right.
I think why I would say mine started more as a question.
Yeah.
But would this also serve as a cautionary tale for future, for future leaders? Down the line, as like in regard to in regard to like who you can trust and who you cannot, amongst your inner circle.
I would say it's less about trusting and more about behaving, right? It's the cautionary tale is don't act in a disgraceful, dishonorable way. Brian?
You made the differentiation that it was more dishonorable for the fact that she was his wife and not
Right.
a courtesan or a concubine. Was it commonplace for men to show off their mistresses and courtesans? Because, sorry if this is like totally out there, but
No.
a modern comparison I think would be like someone like Kanye West, who his wife Bianca. Don't laugh. You know what I'm talking about. The fact that he has his wife Bianca Censori parading around naked for everyone to see. It's almost like a humiliation ritual. And like, was it commonplace for men to just,
So-
like show off their women, like you would show off like new furniture or a car or something?
Sort of. So it would depend. I was a little perhaps glib with that. It would kind of depend on the relationship that you had with your girlfriend / concubine. So this label could encompass many different types of relationships, right? So like the title concubine, what this actually looked like and the relationship between the two in ancient Greece could occupy a range of things, right? And so a common event that we'll talk about a little bit later is the idea of the symposium, right? The all-male gathering. And here the host would have female entertainers, right? Either people that he hired, people from his household, right? But kind of lower status person, and they would be, in various states of dress or undress that would be considered shameful if it was not just his wife, but kind of a respectable woman. So that's kind of the thing. It's what matters, I guess. If I'm going to be really technical, it's not just that you're showing off someone, but who you're showing off, right? And here, the big part of the story is that it's his wife. The king could have easily showed off other people, right? And it wouldn't have been problematic to the Greeks. It's the fact that it's his wife, and that this is not because it's a disgraceful way to treat a woman, but it's a disgraceful way to treat a respectable woman. And that distinction for the Greeks is going to be very, very important. Okay? And we'll talk about this a little bit later too, when we talk about Athens. All right. Other questions? Yeah. All right. What else was interesting or useful about this? Well, up here, I guess we need some help. I've got a couple of questions with the page number and the paragraph numbers where these questions get addressed. Which one should we talk about?
How about the moral of the story?
The moral of the story, well, there's a couple. The moral of the story of Croesus and Solon. All right. So everyone take a couple minutes. Pages 12 through 16, we've got paragraphs 30 through 33. Okay. Let's take 5 minutes, 7 minutes to scan through these paragraphs, and we'll talk about the story of Croesus, right, this Lydian king who meets the Athenian Solon. Okay, has everyone encountered Cleobus and Baito? Yes? Yep. Okay. So, framing device. The Athenian Solon, who we're going to be talking about more in 2 classes, supposedly comes to Sardis, the capital city of Lydia, and visits King Croesus. Right? At this point, one of the most powerful, richest men in all of the world. And what question does King Croesus put to Solon? Well,
Who's the happiest man you've met?
who's the happiest man you've ever met? And Croesus obviously has an answer, expected answer in mind. Who's he expect Solon to say?
Himself.
Himself. Why?
So,
Why is Croesus expecting Solon to say him?
He has like wealth and prestige.
Wealth, prestige, right? Again, he's one of the richest, most powerful men in the world, if not the richest, most powerful, right? Like, he's got everything he wants. Who could be happier than Croesus, right? But that's not the answer that Solon gives. Solon says, the happiest person I've ever met is Tellus of Athens. And Croesus is like, who's that? I've never heard of him. What do we know about Tellus of Athens?
well, what we know about him, based on what, based on what was Solon has said to Cornelius, and in passage 30, where he
Yeah.
says, "Tells of Athens, sire, full astonishment at what he heard." Croesus demanded sharply, "And why do you deem Tellus happiest?" To which the other replied, "First, because his country was flourishing in his days, and he himself had sons both beautiful and good, and he had lived to see children born to each of them, and these children were all grew up, and further because after a life spent in what our people look upon as comfort, his end was sparkling and glorious. In addition to that, and to be further, in a battle between the Athenians and their neighbors and the Elias, he came to the assistance of his countrymen, the foe, and died upon the field most gallantly. The Athenians gave him a public funeral on the spot where he fell and paid him with the highest honors."
Okay. So, what makes Tellus of Athens the happiest man, according to Solon? What makes it? Oh.
He had good offsprings and he died in battle.
Good family, right? I mean, he had sons. He saw his sons have sons, so he had grandsons. Died in battle fighting for Athens. So he was the happiest man ever. All right.
Probably the perfect life and ending.
That's a big part of it, right? That's Solon says. Perfect life and ending. Right? Cleobus and Baito, right? Two Argives, so two other Greeks, right? And they're around Argos. And again, these are big, strong brothers, right? Who've won Pan-Hellenic competitions. And why are they kind of the number 2 and 3 on the happiness chart, according to Solon? What did they do that made them so happy? What did they do that made them so happy? So 31. What did they do?
They drove their mother to the event because I guess like the workers didn't bring the car in time.
What do you mean by drive?
Well, they didn't have a car, but I
They had a
don't know.
cart,
Cart.
and what didn't show up? The oxen didn't show up. And their mother needed to get to this religious festival. So what do Cleobus and Biton, these two, kind of strapping brothers do? They pull the cart. They pull the mom's cart in lieu of oxen so she can get to the festival. And everyone's all impressed. The mother's so impressed. Oh my God, my great sons. Like, look what they did. So the mother says a prayer at the festival. To Hera, my sons behaved in this amazing way. Please grant them something special, something that regular humans don't have, right? Reward them for their effort. What's their reward?
And
They die.
They die.
They fall asleep, die, right? They don't wake up again, and everyone celebrates them. Number 2 happiest man Solon's ever met. Okay, so died of what? Exhaustion, yeah, maybe. So what's the moral of the story? What's the moral of Briar?
Wealth and and status do not bring happiness, but honorable living and a noble death do?
Right. So the honorable living part, right? And especially, and this is the point that he makes, the noble death. Because what he goes on to talk about, right, in the next couple paragraphs, and he mentions this in 32, right? He says, if in addition to all of this stuff, right, lives a good honorable life, he ends his life well, truthfully, he is the man of whom you are in search, the man who may rightly be termed happy. Call him, however, until he die, not happy, but fortunate, right? So you can't know if someone is truly happy until they die, and they die well, okay? All right, so that's the moral there, right? And part of this is that, spoiler alert, Croesus is going to lose everything that he has, right? He's going to lose all of his wealth and power. But really what's interesting for our part, right, is this, what does it mean to live kind of a good, honorable life? What is it that Tellus, Cleobus, and Baito do that it's kind of so noteworthy in their lives? What do they do? Jeremy.
Selfless.
How are they selfless?
I guess in the sense of like, they don't have to do that, but they're giving, like, they're not expecting a reward for it. They're doing it for the greater good almost.
Like who are doing what? Let's be specific.
Like they're giving their bodies basically to make this festival happen.
All right, so Cleobus and Baito don't have to take their mother, right? But they are going to work strenuously hard, right? I'm sure they're going to be really sore after the fact, bringing their mother there, right? So again, something that they are doing not for themselves, sort of, right? But for the larger good. All right, Mark, what do you have?
Oh yeah, I just want to say they were just proud to be righteous.
And what makes them righteous? Like, what are they doing that is righteous?
The good action, they're helping the mother, they're just being a service, like if you enjoy doing what you're doing.
Bingo. Helping their mother, right? So part of it's about the religious festival, but the big part of it is that their mother is in need and they step up to do it. And what leads to their quote unquote reward? What's the thing? Not just their actions, but why did they die? Because of a mother, right? Saying the prayer, wanting something good, a good reward for her sons, right? So again, it's this service to the mother. And again, their reward is the happy death, right? And this is what makes them happy. What about Tellus? What did Tellus do that's all that good? Mark?
Oh yeah, I think it's just he was righteous and was doing the right things. He had kids, and he was fulfilled his life.
He had kids, and specifically, we're going to be really gendered here. He had sons, right? Unfortunately, that's part of the story here, right? He had sons, and his sons had sons, right? And then died for a city-state. He died for Athens, right?
Sorry, I just wanted to mention this one thing. Usually when you're like the father or the grandfather, your parents or your grandchildren, they are expecting to bury you, and not you bury them. So I'm guessing him dying in the battle while, they witnessed it is something of great honor.
Yeah, I think that can be part of it, right? Again, that he doesn't have to watch his children get killed. Right. And then there's one other element to all of this stuff, right? How to phrase this? I don't know a good way to phrase this, so I'm just going to say it. Both of these acts, right, of Tellus and of Cleobus and Baito, earn public kind of praise.
Like heroic.
Right. But it's not just their actions, but everyone sees it Everyone recognizes it. Everyone, like, it's not just that Tellus dies in battle, but after the battle, they kind of like raise up a celebration to him. In Cleobus and Bido, again, it's the reward from the mother, and then they build statues after them. So part of having a good death is not just kind of what you're dying for, but that everyone knows this and everyone's going to celebrate it. What's going to live on? If you die, what's going to live on after you?
Your memory.
Your memory, you know, the story of your deeds, right? Your legend, right? So this is
The legacy.
the moral. So the moral of the story there, right, is to live well, and then you have to die in order to be happy. But think about what living well means, right? About this idea about family and about polis that are being emphasized in both of these stories. All right. Okay, a couple points really fast, then we'll move on, right? So why Herodotus tells this story, right? Like, why is he talking about a couple hundred years of Lydian kings? This has arguably, one might say, nothing to do with his main story between the war between the Greeks and the Persians, right? But no. So in book 1, paragraph 6 on page 1, Croesus, the son of Alyattes, by birth a Lydian, was lord of all the nations to the west of the river Halys. Up there. The stream which separates Syria from Paphlagonia runs with a course from south to north and finally falls into the Euxine, the Black Sea. So far as our knowledge goes, he was the first of the barbarians who had dealings with the Greeks, forcing some of them to become his tributaries and entering into alliance with others. So why is Croesus important, and Lydia important for Herodotus' story?
Because he's taking over Greek, all this.
Right? Other people have taken over Greek city-states before. What's different about Croesus?
He also formed alliance.
Also formed alliances, but other people have formed alliances too. What's different about him, or unique about him? So you guys are both right.
He's the last one to do it.
No, he's the first one, or the first.
Okay.
Right?
What I was gonna say is that, and that the why he has done all these things, I think was also I think what makes his strategy a little bit different was that up to that time all Greeks had been free.
Well, okay, that's a loaded statement, but yes, right. Up until this point, the Greeks had been free. Yep. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means later too, in another class. But yes, they have been free because again, he's the first of the barbarians, right? The non-Greeks here, right? Specifically, the Easterners, the people to the east, the Asians, to have dealings with the Greeks, right? To take control of them, or to kind of form political agreements with them. And again, this is the story is the conflict between East and West, right? Remember all of the woman stealing at the beginning? He's the first that they know of, right? Kind of in this new historic age to kind of have these types of political relationships, right? Did you have a question, or were you?
Actually, I'll save it for later.
Okay. So we're going to move on, but as you think about this too, right? Oracles play a big role in this story, right? So there's all of these events where the oracles basically either make something happen or explain what needs to be done in order for something to happen. And the interesting, right, what we see in all of these stories of the oracles, right, is how they function as pan-Hellenic, or even, in the case of Croesus, right, Alyattes and Gyges, right, pan-Mediterranean, right, sites. That they're sites that draw together all of the Greeks, right? They're sites where decisions are made, and that we have even those who are kind of tangentially connected with the Greek world participating in them as well, even though, right, they're not Greek themselves. Right.
Actually, I didn't raise my hand.
Okay. All right, so let's say a few more things here. All right, in the Archaic era, there's an artistic flourishing in Greece, right? So again, new influences coming in from Southwest Asia is going to lead to kind of artistic revolution, right, in some ways. We talked about Corinth becoming the leading commercial center under Cypselus and his son Periander, right? Corinth's big name to fame is going to be fine pottery, which they do in what's called the black figure technique. So here's a Corinthian vase. Corinth had this kind of distinctive yellow clay nearby, which they use for their pottery, so that's how you recognize that it's Corinthian. And what happens with the black figure is basically you kind of fire the pot and everything, and then you have this, essentially, for lack of better words, black paint, right, that you're going to kind of paint on and kind of scrape out the edges, and you've got black figures, right, or figures done in this black paint, right? So it's Corinthian. This will be taken up by other Greek city-states as well too. Athens, for example, right, has its own black figure pottery. So Athens had kind of a redder clay nearby, and we see the scene being drawn there with the black paint. Now, Athens is going to take this one step further, though, right? So Athens will soon surpass Corinth by the end of the Archaic era, developing what they call red figure, right? And this is almost doing the inverse, right? Where you've got this red pot, it's all kind of painted in glazed black, and then kind of scraping out the figures in kind of letting the original kind of sheen of the pottery show through, right? So here we have some examples of Athenian red figure art. So this is coming out in the Archaic era. Mohammed?
The image on the right, I mean, the figure is not really red. It's orange.
Well, okay. They didn't call it red figure. It's whatever that color of clay is, that's just kind of the shorthand that scholars use. But fair enough. That is very orange. And I don't know if that's the pot itself or if that's just the coloring on the photograph. All right, so we've got new types of pottery, right? And again, these are going to be used locally. They're going to be a big part of Archaic era trade, right, with other Greek city-states and even beyond. So remember the emporia that got set up, right? Trading with non-Greek peoples all throughout the Mediterranean and Western Asia, right? Pottery is going to be a big export. They tend to, in the pictures on the art, talk about mythology. So one of the reasons why Greek mythological stories are going to kind of spread widely, and activities. Okay, the Greeks also develop for them a new form of statuary, right? So this is the kind of common Archaic era style, right? And here you can see that they are drawing heavily from earlier Egyptian styles. So this is called the Koros, or the Kore style, and that just means young man or young woman, so it's not really an imaginative name, right? And here you can see an example of kind of earlier Egyptian statuary, right? So kind of the people standing there straight up, arms at their side, and seeing one foot stepping forward, right? The Greeks are adopting this for their own kind of Archaic era, right? Or their own Archaic era style. Here is a kore, right? A young woman. You can still see the same style, right? Kind of standing straight up, hands out. Over there on your right is the original. If you remember back on day one of the things I talked about was, well, none of the statues actually looked like that in antiquity, right? They were painted all sorts of bright colors that we've been able to kind of recover with some modern scientific techniques. Here is our best sense about how that statue would have looked kind of on the ground in Greece. Okay, the Archaic era is also going to be a time where there's going to be an explosion of new forms of literature and philosophy, right? So one of the big developments that's going to happen is what's called lyric poetry, right? And it's called lyric poetry because it is poetry that is meant to be accompanied by a lyre. So the lyre is that kind of stringed instrument that person's holding up there, Sans is holding up there, right? And so you were basically supposed to strum the lyre and kind of recite the poetry, right? Now, lyric poetry is going to be different than kind of the earlier epics that emerged right at the very beginning of the Archaic era, right? The poems of Homer and Hesiod. Lyric poetry is going to be shorter, more personal, more emotional, right? It's going to be about things like love and desire and anger, in these kind of very day-to-day contexts, as opposed to the grand stories of heroes, right? Two of the most famous of the lyric poets from the island of Lesbos, Alcaeus there on the left, and Sappho, right? You'll notice Sappho is a woman, so very unusual for women to be kind of publicly recognized authors, right? Sappho was exceptional in that regard, and is going to be kind of one of the, looked back upon by later poets as kind of one of the leading kind of inspirational voices for this new movement. Also, new advances in philosophy. Now here, right, philosophy means something bigger than it does today, right? The Greeks used the word philosophy to describe not just what we would call philosophy, but also what we would call like science, what we would call religion, what we might even call anthropology and sociology, right? All fell under the umbrella of philosophy. Philosophy was just a study of the world, right? And again, the world had both natural and supernatural components, right? There were the things you can touch and see, and then the things that were beyond your sight. Now, this new turn, right, that's happening in the Archaic era, again, is not happening in a vacuum. That the Greeks are drawing upon new ideas that are coming out of Egypt, right, that are coming out of Persia, and they are, again, kind of taking it and running with it and doing some new things with it, right? One of the big trends that's happening here is that they want to, or some of the philosophers are focusing more and more on natural explanations, right? So even though philosophy covers both, wanting to describe more things as natural than as supernatural, or things in the past that might be described as supernatural, trying to come up with natural explanations for them, right? Again, this is what we would call today scientific inquiry. So example, Thales of Miletus, who is the first to accurately predict a coming solar eclipse. So by basically taking readings of the stars, positions of the sun and moon, he's able to predict when an eclipse is going to happen, and he's right. Or we have Anaximander over here, who makes predictions about celestial orbits, and that the things, the lights in the sky aren't just hanging up there, right? But in fact, objects are revolving around the sun, which then promptly gets forgotten about or disregarded and disappeared for a while. But still, right, these are the things that are kind of being posited in archaic philosophy. All right, so there is a brief overview of archaic culture, right, and some changes. We're going to do a deeper dive into two of the kind of quickly